Hey, Joseph.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me again. I feel like now that we've done this once, I'm like more chill about it. I didn't really know what to expect the first time, but thanks for, continuing on and with this conversation about first gens and finance. We established in
Yeah,
our last conversation that, you consider yourself first gen and you went through your criteria for that. I'm first gen because I was the first in my family to go to college and enter a white collar career. And we both came from working class backgrounds, which I think is the most significant qualifier for the first gen experience, regardless of your race, ethnicity, origin of birth. So it's definitely something that we're going to continue to unpack for the rest of Hispanic Heritage Month. So today we're going to narrow the scope of the focus a little and talk about
yeah.
first gens and salary negotiation, which is a fraught subject for me, I will admit. I made so many mistakes. But how do you want to kind of frame up the conversation today? What do you want to start with?
Well, I think when you start talking about salary negotiation, first you have to realize what's your relationship with money. That was a real tough one for me. I didn't understand, or I didn't appreciate my relationship with money. I remember growing up, my father telling me, I want you to go get a good job because I want you to all to have the same struggles me and your mother have, where you're living paycheck to paycheck. You got to pay bills. You got to do this. You got to do that. So that stuck with me, right? So yes, get a good job and do well, but at the same time, it came down to I was just trying to pay bills. So I was only looking at a salary based on my bills, not based on benefits, not based on what I could do with that salary, whether investing, whether taking a vacation, whether building up equity in a home by buying a home instead of renting a home. So all those things weren't really known to me. To me, a salary's only thing was we can pay more bills now that we have more pay, right? So it wasn't this big scope of something. But what about you? What do you think?
Oh, definitely. I mean, my father used to kind of jokingly, not jokingly say, "We don't talk about money because you don't talk about what you don't have." But it was true. Like, my parents definitely, they had their arguments, but interestingly enough, it was never about money. I think they just kind of had this shared perspective that if what would really be the point, like they just had to kind of figure it out. um but I would think that you know even if I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't really know like what my father was making or what my parents were earning. Like when you're a kid, you're so oblivious to those things. But
Yeah,
like in retrospect, I think about certain choices he made and certain actions he took, and I'm like, he had no idea what he was doing. There were just little kind of cues, evidence of that throughout my childhood of like, he didn't realize that some credit cards made you pay at the end of the month in full. And then he would end up in this spiral of interest that like, and I'm like, how did they not know, right? Like,
right,
why weren't
right,
they reading the
right.
fine print? But again, it's what you don't know, what you don't know.
Yeah,
So it's an interesting education.
yeah, it is. I think so. As I got older and my father started to make more money, like I can see the shift going from we're not considered working class anymore. Now he has he got promoted to a white collar job. But now when I came out of college and I went right into a white collar job, it was just different, right? Because I didn't understand salary like I did then. Now he had a better grasp on it by then. He understood a lot of things, investing, 401k. But because I only looked at money as a way to pay bills. I never thought about a 401k. I never thought about retirement. I never thought about investing. I look back on the things I probably had a chance to invest in. It was Bitcoin. It was when Facebook went public, whether it was Microsoft, Apple, whatever it could have been back then. If I put money to invest it back then, from the salary that I was making, that could have set me up for a very long time. But once again, you don't think about those things. Go back to your point. You don't know what you don't know. So when I'm going to negotiate a salary, I have to consider how my relationship with money is affecting how I'm looking at this salary. It's not just about collecting income. It's not just about this is enough to pay the bills or this is more than enough to pay the bills. What it's more so about, it's this is the amount of work and effort I'm putting in and this should reflect my salary. This is the amount of expertise I bring to the table. This is the amount of experience I have, and it should be reflected in my salary, as opposed to just give me more than I'm making now. I
Right.
was willing to say yes to anything that was at least maybe 5,000 or 10,000 more than I was making. If it was 20,000, then it was definitely a yes. And I remember doing that for a job. I got promoted to a very high position, and they gave me a $20,000 pay increase, which was great, but it was not complementary to what I was doing for the job. And therefore, I was missing out a lot more. Because when you start talking about salary, you start talking about other people's salary as well, you'll start to see that there can be a difference because some people know what's coming to the table. They know what they bring to the table. They know how to negotiate. It's very important.
Well, I think when you're brought up in, a more stable middle class or upper middle class household where survival isn't like a regular theme, you you're just thinking about things differently. That framing of survival shapes so much because I mean, like a lot of first gens coming from a working class background, I was kind of embedded with this belief system of you're lucky to have a job. You should be grateful to have a job. Don't make yourself appear too greedy because really as long as you have a job, you're okay. And it's like, first of all, that's terrible advice. But it's coming ironically from a place of love because that's how they felt they were able to survive, and it's insidious too because in the rest of the world that isn't coming from that place. They're just coming from a healthy place of like, hey, equal work for equal pay. Like I'm bringing this to the table and this is what the market value of that is. And this is what this is what I'm worth for that role. It is more like, just put your head down, don't make a fuss, don't, make yourself a problem, and you'll be hired and people will see that you do a good job and then you'll get your money. That doesn't happen. That never happens. It's like that may have been true many decades ago.
Yeah.
But now it's like you have to walk this very fine line of like, yes, you want to be collaborative and seen as a team player, but you're also very much expected, and no one tells you this, but to advocate for yourself and to
Yes.
be individualistic to a degree.
Yes.
So I felt like I kind of came into the workplace with a warped understanding of my value.
If you've never seen it, you really don't know how to do it. Right? You know how to ask someone else to advocate for you or have someone speak up on your behalf. Generally, when you're first gen, the reason you don't know how to advocate for yourself is because you don't know what you should advocate for. Why should I speak up for myself to get a higher salary? Because you're right, I should just be grateful. I should be grateful that I have a position. I should be grateful that I have food on the table. I should be grateful that we have a place to live. Roof over your head, food on the table, all that's good stuff. Like that's common. But I think where it gets a little bit different when you have to learn to advocate for yourself is when you have to learn that it's important that you speak up. Because if you don't, I've learned people will give you what you don't ask for. So it's very important to speak up, especially when it comes to salary, because salary goes a long way. Because now I love the questions they ask now. What are your salary expectations? I love when I see that question now. Back when I first started, I never saw that question. But now having that out there, I think it helps people to advocate for themselves who don't know they need to advocate for a salary. You're just not used to it. So it becomes a foreign world to you. And you want to navigate it as in a way that doesn't offend, doesn't push people away, that doesn't cause you to lose a job. Like all those things go through your head, I think, as a first generation. Because you remember, we're coming up as a working class. There has to be work for us to do in order for us to have money. So if there is no work, then what do we do? And so it's one of those things where you have to kind of switch that mindset is now that you're in a different kind of professional format, you've got to start to speak because that's what people expect from leaders, right? That's what
Right.
they expect when you get that white collar job, that you're going to speak up and even that they don't have to prompt you, but you're going to go ahead and say and do what needs to be done because that's the position that you're getting hired for. So it's so important. I think the difficult thing is like, how do you advocate for yourself when you're talking about salary? Like, what would you say is the way that you can advocate?
So I would say that, I think the game changer for me, and I'm embarrassed to admit how long this took for me to kind of put two and two together. But when I realized that the hiring manager, it puts like an extra green check in their box if they can hire you for under budget, right? Like I always thought I was making myself like the real desirable candidate by like, asking for like the lowest part of the range. And yeah, but you're also like, you're making them look good, right? You're not doing yourself any favors, but you're making them look really good. That for me was a game changer when I realized that. I'm like, wait a minute. that doesn't sound right to me. Like but I needed to also own my part in it and say, well, why am I always asking for the bottom rung?
Right.
Especially
Right.
once I had a few years of experience under my belt. For a long time, I felt like I didn't have the right to ask for more because, oh, well, I'm still green. I'm still learning. I'm young. I'm inexperienced. And, middle class kids don't think like that. You know, first of all, because many of them, are they grow up seeing their parents work in professional jobs. I'm not saying necessarily a CEO or like anything like that, but they have the professional networks and they get advice from their parents or people in their family that have established careers. So they know they go into rooms with kind of some informal prep in the beginning. They already know to some degree how to speak to authority figures. And they're encouraged from day one to kind of, from their family, they're encouraged to speak up and be able to advocate for themselves. In a working class family, it's the opposite. It's like, shh, cállate la boca. Like, don't make any waves, don't stir the pot. Compliance is the name of the game.
Right.
So
Right.
I think, first of all, recognizing like where some of your beliefs might be holding you back, and then reframing them as, okay, what if I were looking at this from the other side of the coin? Like, what are other people with my experience level tending to ask in this market for this kind of a position? There's so many resources to do that now that I didn't have when I was coming up because the internet was not a thing.
No, I learned to advocate by looking up salaries now. So, like you said before the internet, whether it was just asking questions, making a connection, hey, what is the average pay for this? Now I can get on the internet. Now you can ask ChatGPT almost. What's the
Yeah.
average pay for this position? Right. So that gives you a good starting point. And one of the things I was saying people advocate for their salary is you have to start with the statement the average pay for this position is, and HR can take it from there. That's where you can start negotiating. It doesn't mean you're going to get the top pay for that position. What it does mean though is you kind of set a standard of what you want. I remember one time, me and a friend of mine had applied for the same position at the same company. They had multiple ones open, and I knew what the average pay was for that position. So I went in and that's what I stated I wanted. It comparatively now it wasn't as much as I've been blessed to make now, but he went in just accepting whatever they offered him. And I remember one day, I don't know how we got on the conversation. We were just talking about what our salary was, and he asked me, and he didn't come from a working class family, so this was interesting, right? He came from a middle class family, and he asked me what my pay was, and I told him, and he asked me how did I get that, and I asked him what his pay was, and he told me, and I was like, I'm more curious how you got that. And he said, I just took what they offered. And I said, no, you had to advocate for yourself. You had to go in there, you got to speak up and say, no, this is the pay that I'm looking for. Because one of the things I think first gens probably should know is that people want you to work for them. People want you in that position and they're willing to pay for that position. Sometimes you got to advocate a little bit harder, but more than likely they're willing to pay you. All you have to do is ask. And I think as I got older, that became more apparent to me. If I come in prepared for this conversation with the average salary, with the expectation that I should get mid range, and I have to be honest with myself too, right? If I'm not at the top tier of my field, then I probably don't need the top tier money. I probably shouldn't get that. But if they want to give it to me, I'll take it. I'm always an advocate for that. I'll take that. But I should come in and be honest with myself and say this is what I think I am owed for this position. This is the amount that this is my salary expectation for this position because of the work that I've done, because of the experience I have. But it really just takes doing that research. And kind of like you said, just advocating for yourself and being confident enough to know. And even if you didn't come prepared, you can always ask the question, well, what's the average pay for this position right here? What is the expected average pay?
Or another great question to ask, which I got to say, I was so happy when I don't think all states passed the law, but when New York passed the law that you had to, as an employer, post the salary range for the
Yes.
position.
Yes.
I was like, oh my God, that would have been such a game changer for me when I was
Yes.
younger. But, one first gen to any other first gens who are listening out there, a couple things that you should know about that, because if you don't kind of know the ins and outs, it could be a little bit of a head fake. So
Yeah.
first of all, a lot of companies they'll include whatever benefit
Yeah.
compensation
Yeah. Yeah.
that they are providing for the role, which is, your medical, your dental, all of those other fringes. They'll include that as part of the salary package. So it's like, you got to really make sure that when you're asking for salary, you are focusing on your base salary because that's what you're paying your bills from. It's like if you go in thinking that a job is going to pay $100,000 a year, and it's like, well, it's actually 75, but with the benefits included, it comes up to $100,000 package. Like, keep that in mind. Like, some companies are reflecting that in that
Yes.
range. So you still
Yes,
need
that's
to do
true.
your research and get the data to your point of what is average for said role in that market in that discipline. So experience though weighs into it too. So I personally like if it's a job that I have done for a long time, that's in my wheelhouse, that I have maybe done even like more senior work than maybe what the title implied, I'm absolutely going to ask for the top of the
Yeah.
end of the
Oh yeah.
range now, and I'm not going to
Oh
feel
yeah.
bad about it, right?
No.
Like, we can
Mm.
negotiate, but I'm going to come in asking at the top. And I'm surprised at how many employers look down on that.
Right.
It's like, well, they have to also kind of come to the table too, right? And you have to be willing to back it up. Like, if you're going to ask for that end of the range, you have to come correct with, well, this is why. This is, my
Yes.
track record. This is my
Yes.
proven expertise. This is my accomplishments. So I think there's, a kind of almost like a kind of a hidden curriculum in itself when it comes to decoding some of these salary ranges that if you're first gen may not be intuitive to you right away. But yeah, kind of doing the research, as you said, getting some data together, putting that against what you can actually bring to the table, and understanding that what are you going to need from a base salary. Yes, you need benefits. Benefits are very important, but you should be negotiating for what you are going to take home every 2 weeks.
Yes. Yes. Because if you don't, you're going to be so disappointed. Especially when that first check comes through, you're going to be so disappointed. So I like now when I see companies ask the question, what is your expected base salary? And then I see them ask later on, what is your expected salary with bonuses, with benefits, and things of that nature?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would say too, when it comes to salary, I always try to encourage people figure out the benefits. Benefits are important when we're talking about salary negotiation because you got to remember you're still paying insurance. Take all that into account to make sure that you can take care of yourself and your family, and then take into account once again what's my relationship with money. How am I going to use this money, and what's the purpose of this money? It's not just so I can get the bag as we as we say sometimes. It's more so this money is going to be a tool that I can use one to help me enjoy my life, two to take care of my family, and I can use this money to invest and also help people.
Sure.
Right. So it's important. Once you know your values and what you want to do, that's where salary comes in to big to me. So one of the things I consider when I'm looking at negotiating salaries, how much do I want to give away? Right. So I'm considering those things. How much do I want to invest? How much do I need to take care of my family? Whether that's the mortgage, food, groceries, things of that nature, school. Right. So I'm thinking about those things. And then I'm going to think about the benefits as well. What benefits do I get that are going to help me? And how much am I paying out of pocket for these benefits? So all those things I think are important when you're talking about salary, especially from a first gen perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking there's also levels to this, right? And the data shows this. Like, women from working class backgrounds, so double ding if you're a woman of color, like, can be perceived as pushy or being overly aggressive if they're just asking for their worth in a salary negotiation. So I do think that there are some very real cultural norms that are not being taken into consideration. But I think something that's not maybe broadcasted to us as much is that companies expect you to negotiate,
Yes, they
right?
do. They
So
do.
it's just, I think, because we live in so much more of a data driven world, it does put more onus on you as the candidate to really do your research, pull your homework together, and be able to go in with a solid case for, like, hey, this is why I'm worth what I'm worth. So it's just, I think, something to kind of keep in mind is the kind of social conditioning that we come up with, but also the social conditioning that we're bumping up against when we enter these conversations.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. It's the only way to do it. One of the things my mom, I remember she did tell me when going into like some of these conversations is be willing to negotiate. Your salaries are always negotiable, and then that stuck with me. So I'm really grateful that she said that to me at that time. But yeah, you got to negotiate, get yourself comfortable, do your research, and then go in there with the expectation that this is a salary I'm expecting. These are the reasons why, and I know the base pay for this, and I'm also considering the benefits, and I think you'll be fine.
Another great question to ask is if like what is this position budgeted at, because sometimes that can, even if they're posting a salary range, I would say just, this is just kind of my 50 cents, but if you see a job with like an insane salary range, like a $200,000 spread, like be very, very, very suspicious, right? Like that just does not, that sounds a little lost in the sauce to me. But a lot of times it's like, they're trying to cast a wide net of candidates when they
Yeah.
do that, right? So
Yes.
when if you're lucky enough to get into the conversation and maybe you have a number in mind that's like somewhere in that range, it's always better to get them to give you a number first.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that you can kind of maybe surgically get to what the actual range is, like what they're actually going to be looking to pay somebody, most likely, what is this budgeted at?
Good. It's a good question. Such a good question. I'm gonna have to put that one down in my book. That's a good question.
But I think sometimes it also like surprises them because not a lot of people think to ask that.
No, no. Once again, it comes to that time, right? That experience. It's what you're used to, and then it's also what you've seen. So this is where I would just encourage people to challenge yourself a little bit, be patient at the same time, but be willing to grow in that. And be willing to be uncomfortable while asking those tough questions. What's this budgeted at? And sometimes too, like if the job won't tell you, if they like no, well, we'll find someone else, be okay with that. Be okay with that and move on. So
And I got to say, in this day and age, young first generation professionals, like just getting started in the game, I have a lot of hope that they won't make the same mistakes I did.
yeah.
In terms of just being so happy to get my foot in the door that like I accepted peanuts. And then that was like a 10-year legacy of trying to catch up. So, to kind of do a better job than I did, there are so many informal resources available. You no longer need to be connected to, a specific type of person to get this information, which is more how it was when I was coming up. But yes, still work your network. I'm not suggesting that you don't, but through social media, through, platforms like YouTube and TikTok and, even to a degree LinkedIn, although that's a bit of a minefield. But there can be a lot of informal guidance that is free, it's accessible. So if you don't have those resources readily available to you in real life, you can at least give yourself a decent primer going into these professional negotiations where you have your feet under you a little bit more. Practice is part of it, though. You're going to crash and burn a few times probably, right? But it's more about flexing that muscle, getting comfortable
Yes.
with being in a room with someone who has the power to, employ you or not, but sticking your ground and saying, this is what would be fair for my
Yeah.
experience in this role.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. I think you summed up everything perfectly right there. Flex the muscle. If there was anything I would say be the takeaway from this is flex the muscle, get used to it, and then you'll end up seeing the results. But you just gotta flex it.
And just starting to ask the questions can actually start to shift your empowerment.
Yes.
So this was a fun conversation. My goodness. I could keep going, but you've been so generous with your time. And we are going to pick this up again next week with a different topic. We'll decide that, I guess, when the time gets a little closer. But I just want to thank you so much again, Joseph May, Executive Director of Enrichment Learning. Did I get that right?
Enrichment
The Greater
Learning, yeah.
YMCA of Greater Richmond.
Greater Richmond.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm loving this series. Really appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to the next one.
Okay.
Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.